If you've watched the news recently and found yourself confused about Iran, why its leaders talk the way that they do, chanting things like death to Israel, death to the United States, understand that isn't just a slogan to rile the crowd behind a political movement. It's a long-standing religious conviction, a deep-seated national policy rooted in a centuries-old historical event that continues to shape the soul of Iran's ruling class. I want to walk you through something that most Western news coverage never explains. What's happening right now with Iran is not about oil or the Straits of Hormuz. This isn't merely another geopolitical kerfuffle to be negotiated by envoys sitting across a conference table or shooting emails back and forth. This is, at its deepest level, a theological issue, at least from Iran's side. Because Western diplomats don't really get that, the negotiations end up being nothing more than jaw sessions that accomplish nothing, which is fine from Iran's side of it. They want the delay. They're all about the delay. You see, this is profoundly, deeply, at its very core, a spiritual issue. Iran gets that. The United States doesn't. And I hope by the end of this video, you'll get it and things will fall into place in your understanding of what's laid out in daily news. To do that, we need to go back to the start of Islam and a crisis in its leadership that's having a huge impact on world events today. When Muhammad died in 632, he left no clear instructions for who should lead the Muslim community after him. That leadership vacuum produced the deepest fracture in all of Islamic history. One group, who became the Sunni majority, believed that leadership should pass to whoever the community selected, based on competence and the consensus of the community. And they chose Abu Bakr, a companion of Muhammad, as their first caliph. Another, smaller group disagreed with that. They believed that leadership belonged by divine right to Muhammad's family, specifically to his cousin Ali, who married Muhammad's daughter Fatima, and so became his son-in-law as well as a cousin. Now, this group became known as the Shia, meaning the participants of Ali. It wasn't simply a preference of management styles between Abu Bakr and Ali. It was a claim about who Allah wanted to lead the Ummah, the Muslim community. Now, Shias claimed that Allah himself had designated a bloodline to carry spiritual authority forward. Now, if I were to recount the whole history of Islam, we would be here for a while. So let's jump ahead to the critical split between the Sunni and the Shia. In 680 AD, Ali's son Hussein and a small band of supporters were slaughtered by the forces of the Sunni Caliph at Karbala, modern Iraq. Hussein's martyrdom became the defining event shaping Shia identity from then until now. Their righteous, divinely appointed leader was betrayed and killed by an unjust yet powerful pretender. Suffering, injustice, and the vindication of the oppressed are baked into Shia self-understanding at the very deepest level. That's going to matter greatly later, because a movement that understands itself as eternally wronged and eternally awaiting vindication behaves rather differently than one that feels secure. Over the following 2 centuries, Shiites recognized a succession of imams. Now, for Shia, imams are regarded as divinely appointed spiritual and political leaders descended from Muhammad. The major form and dominant group of Shia in Iran hold that there were 12 imams who were infallible. They weren't just prophets. They were uniquely guided and protected from error, carrying forward Muhammad's authority in matters of both doctrine and governance. To put it in terms that Westerners might more readily recognize, they were priest kings. And then something happened that changed everything. The 12th Imam disappeared. Twelver Shia, or sometimes just called the Twelvers, teach that God appointed a line of 12 imams beginning with Ali and ending with Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi, who was born right around 870 AD. His father, the 11th Imam obviously, lived under constant suspicion and surveillance by the ruling Sunni Caliph, who saw the Shia Imams as a threat to their legitimacy. The 11th Imam, along with his father before him, were kept under house arrest by the Sunni Caliphs. When the 11th Imam died, it was suspected that he had been murdered. So, loyal Shia moved the 11th Imam's 4-year-old son, the now 12th Imam, into protection. They took him somewhere underground, and in the years that followed, the boy Imam addressed his followers only through a series of intermediaries that were known as his ambassadors. Now, there were only 4 of these spokesmen for the 12th Imam, because in 1941, the 4th announced that the Mahdi had decided to disappear altogether. This is the Twelver doctrine known as the occultation, a word that means to become hidden. It's the belief that the 12th Imam didn't die, but was hidden by God from human sight and remains alive somewhere to this day in a kind of metaphysical concealment. But, and here's where all of this interfaces with events in Iran today, Twelvers, that is the ruling part in Iran, expect the 12th Imam to return, and when he does, it won't be quietly. He returns as a conquering, world restructuring figure. It's believed that this hidden Imam will reappear at the end of time to restore justice and peace on earth before the Day of Judgment. One source summarizing the tradition puts it this way: the Mahdi, as he's called, will remain in occultation or hidden until he reappears to declare victory over all of the world's infidels and to establish a global Shia Islamic kingdom. Now, here's the theological problem that this created, and it's the hinge on which the rest of the story turns. If the only fully legitimate ruler of the Muslim community is now absent and hidden, what authority can any earthly government claim? Well, for roughly 1,000 years, the answer that most Shia clergy gave was none, really. For centuries, Shia clerics limited themselves to religious guidance, while the political rulers of Shia lands operated without claiming an imam's divine infallibility. So kings could rule, shahs did rule, but no government could claim to be the immanate, the office of the imam. That waiting posture, pious, mostly passive, expecting the Mahdi's return on God's own timetable, that was the dominant Shia political theology for roughly a millennium. But all of that changed dramatically in the 20th century, and the man who changed it built modern Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini did something theologically audacious. While exiled in Iraq in the years before Iran's 1979 revolution, Khomeini developed a theory of Islamic government built around the concept of the guardianship of the jurist. Now, this doctrine, which is rooted in an older Shia legal category that applied to a very limited oversight of the vulnerable, people like widows and orphans, it was expanded by Khomeini into something way more far-reaching. He claimed that Shia clergy should hold not just religious authority, but all authority, even political control of the state. In turn, that Shia clergy holding and wielding all authority needed a single supreme cleric having final say over the nation's affairs. He came to be called the Ayatollah. Now, Khomeini's argument, spelled out in his 1970 book, Islamic Government, was this: God gave humanity Islamic law to be implemented in society, not just studied in classrooms. Since no one understood Islamic law better than the trained clergy, it was only natural that they should govern as guardians of the state until the 12th Imam, that is the hidden Imam, would return. Khomeini argued that in the face of modern secular regimes that threatened Islam's mission of global dominance, passively waiting for the Imam's return was a form of religious neglect. Establishing a theocratic regime under an Ayatollah wasn't merely permitted, it was a religious obligation. Now, all of that was, of course, new. Until Khomeini, Shiites believed that during the absence of the 12th Imam, Shia clergy were to guide the community spiritually. Khomeini's innovation put the clergy in charge of everything, as a kind of surrogate imam until the 12th Imam came to reclaim his title. Now, for Lord of the Rings fans, think of the Ayatollah as Denethor, the steward of Gondor holding the reign of Minas Tirith while waiting for the rightful king to come and claim his throne. But that king, he's in hiding. In Tolkien's famous tale, he's a ranger named Aragorn who's biding his time. When the Iranian Revolution of 1979 succeeded, Khomeini's theory didn't stay in a seminary. It became the founding constitutional principle of the new Islamic Republic, and Khomeini himself was installed as the country's first supreme leader, the Ayatollah. After Khomeini's death in 1989, Iran's constitution was further amended to strip away the old requirement that the supreme leader be a top-tier religious scholar, which allowed the mid-ranking cleric Ali Khamenei to step into the role and further centralize that office's authority over every organ of the state. So here is what you need to hold on to now. The government of Iran is not simply an authoritarian state that happens to be run by religious men. It's a government whose constitutional legitimacy is explicitly built on the claim that it is ruling as a placeholder for a divine, currently absent monarch, and that its supreme leader, not democratically elected officers, holds final authority precisely because he's understood to be standing in the gap until the Mahdi returns. The regime's legitimacy is quite literally theological. Now, all of that would be merely interesting if it was just about Iran's internal politics. What makes it a global danger is what the regime believes about how the Mahdi's return is actually triggered. Okay, here's where I need to slow down and make sure that you're tracking, because it's the single most important and least understood part of this whole story. Twelvers believe that the period immediately before the Mahdi's return is one of, get this, severe injustice, violent upheaval, and widespread bloodshed. That tradition doesn't simply predict that chaos will happen before the end of its own accord. In Twelver thought, violent chaos is a necessary precondition that brings the Mahdi into the world. It has chilling implications once you connect it to Iran's foreign policy. As one analyst summarizing this strand of thought put it, chaos and war are seen as necessary to bring about the Mahdi's return, and Iranian religious leaders have affirmed that it's Iran's specific role and mission to hasten his appearance and help set the stage for it to happen. That same source notes that for Twelvers, death, martyrdom, chaos are elevated as instruments of divine purpose rather than tragedies to be avoided. Now, I hope you see how that reframes everything about how the Iranian regime engages the world. In most international relations, nations avoid war because it's costly and destabilizing. It's bad for trade and obviously for survival. Normal political logic regards chaos as a problem to be minimized. But if your ruling ideology sees global instability and conflict and apocalyptic scale violence as the mechanism that God uses to summon the Messianic age, then chaos isn't just a risk you tolerate, it becomes a strategic good, an advantage because it hastens your Savior's arrival. Now think about this. Why has Iran pledged to destroy Israel? Israel's no threat to a peaceful Iran. Israel has no economic nor territorial ambitions that threaten Iran. Iran is committed to the annihilation of Israel and uses its proxies of Hamas and Hezbollah to that end, because Twelvers regard the destruction of Israel as a theological precursor to the arrival of their Mahdi. That attitude repeats in the Twelver posture towards the infidel West, and most specifically the United States. While every bomb dropped on Iran by Israel and every cruise missile fired by the United States causes the average Iranian to cower in fear, Twelvers get excited. This explosion or that collapsing building might be the one that triggers the Mahdi's return. U.S. envoys can offer security guarantees and sanctions relief and diplomatic normalization, all reasonable tools in a normal conflict, and still not touch the actual engine driving the Twelver regime. Because that engine isn't about dollars or land, it's theological, it's eschatological. Now, I want to be careful here. I need to be careful here because nuance matters. I hope you understand that I do not mean every Iranian official and every soldier in the IRGC, every ordinary Iranian citizen wakes up plotting the apocalypse. Some of Iran's recent behavior is just ordinary self-interest and has little or nothing to do with the 12-er plan to hasten the Mahdi's return. Religion and politics are tangled up inside Iran's government and not cleanly separated. But that core theological layer is real. It's constitutionally embedded, and it's preached at the point of a gun. It does shape the thinking of the decision makers at the top of Iran's system. That's the danger in its starkest form. A regime whose founding doctrine says that the rightful king is absent, whose constitution says that clerics rule in his place until he returns, and whose apocalyptic tradition says that war, suffering, and global upheaval are the things that bring his return closer. Bottom line, both sides do want peace. The problem is, the United States thinks that peace comes by signing a memo of understanding that opens shipping lanes and ends Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran's leaders are committed to a peace under the Mahdi's reign, a peace that's achieved by taking the world to the brink of annihilation. One would think that Western diplomats would realize something else is going on than just finessing minor details of a negotiation when week after week go by with no real movement toward the objective. When will they wake up and realize Iran is stalling? They're delaying. It keeps hoping that another day of holding out against the big and little Satan of the United States and Israel will see the 12th Imam, their Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah, finally come out of hiding and do his thing. There's a biblical precedent for this. Not long ago, I heard Pastor David Zamora give a brilliant insight on all of this. It was a simple but poignant remark that he made. In Daniel chapter 10, an angel is sent to give the prophet Daniel a message. In verse 13, the angel says that he was delayed in getting to Daniel with the message by the prince of Persia for 21 days. But the archangel Michael was sent to help the angel get through to Daniel. Now, it's safe to understand that the prince of Persia referred to there was a demonic agent, one of the principalities and powers referred to in Ephesians chapter 6 that oppose God. Take careful note of what the prince of Persia did. Persia, of course, being another ancient name for Iran. What did it do? It stalled. It delayed. It seems that spiritual prince is still animating the 12 princes of Persia, the rulers of Iran. They stall, they delay to use the time to rearm and resupply so that they can carry on, not negotiations, but fomenting unrest. And unrest they're theologically committed to because it's deemed as faithfulness to Allah. They want a nuclear weapon and are willing to sacrifice multiple thousands of their citizens in the pursuit of it because either that weapon will cause a mushroom cloud that wakes the Mahdi or the blood of the martyrs who died to make it will. So, why does any of this matter to you watching this video, trying to make sense of headlines about uranium enrichment and proxy militias and missile strikes and rhetoric that sounds almost gleeful about confrontation? Well, because once you see the theological architecture underneath Iran's ruling ideology, some things stop being mysterious. Now you know why Iran has pledged itself to Israel's destruction and why Israel regards a nuclear-capable Iran as an existential threat. Now you understand why Iran refuses to budge on its nuclear ambitions. Other nations have offered to help Iran build a civilian nuclear energy program. Iran says no deal, no how. While an rational nation would avoid the catastrophe being visited on Iran right now, Iran invites the catastrophe of its neighborhoods being leveled, its young men being vaporized, because it thinks that catastrophe serves the will of Allah. Lots of Iranians, including some clerics, reject the 12er urge to hasten the end. So let's not assume that what I've just laid out here is the position of every Iranian. Reports are that the underground church in Iran is exploding. I recently had a chance to spend some time with and teach the Bible to Iranian pastors. It was a glorious time. But I share all of this to clarify the prevailing mindset among Iran's rulers. They're motivated primarily by a religious conviction that is not at all averse to taking the world into the fires of a nuclear holocaust. When you watch this regime's leadership make choices that look irrational by ordinary standards of national self-interest, you're not watching irrationality. You're watching a rationality that operates according to a theological logic where the unraveling of the world isn't simply tolerated, it's anticipated as the doorway through which their hidden king finally walks back into history. That's why any real end to the war has to either see the removal of Iran's nuclear ambition or the removal of its 12er ruling regime.